Hello and welcome back to Abyssin. Get cozy on the couch and grab a coffee, because today we're diving into 5 of the most agonizing cave exploration stories out there. In June of 1992, a group of 10 Boy Scouts set out on an expedition to a cave known as Killingesburg, nestled among the rolling hills of West Virginia. To most people, this cave was just a regular rock formation with nothing particularly special about it. But for these boys, eager for adventure, it was the perfect setting for a day they'd never forget. The cave was located near the Potomac River, and the boys spent the day exploring, laughing, and enjoying the thrill of the outdoors. Among them was Brian Quintanilla, a slender, curious 13-year-old known for noticing little details that others often missed. While most of the scouts stayed on the main paths, Brian spotted a narrow, winding passage deeper inside the cave. It was barely wider than his shoulders, but to him, it looked like a secret shortcut, maybe even a hidden path leading to another chamber. From above, the passage curved sharply, forming an L shape that promised a tricky and exciting challenge. I can already hear what you're thinking. Who in their right mind looks at an L-shaped tunnel and thinks it's a good idea to crawl in there without any gear or preparation? Honestly, I don't think we can really blame the kid. The responsibility lies with the parents for not staying close to him during the trip, but you'll soon find out something surprising about his parents, especially his mother, as this story unfolds. Driven by curiosity, Brian crouched down and peered into the dark, damp opening. Then he started to crawl forward, inch by inch. The rocky walls squeezed against his shoulders and hips as he pushed ahead. When he reached the sharp turn, he realized it would be harder than he expected. He had to twist his body uncomfortably, bending his knees into awkward angles just to keep moving. Even though the pain was real, the excitement of discovering something new kept him going. His breathing quickened as the tunnel tightened around him. With a final push, he made it through the tight curve and into a slightly wider section. For a brief moment, he felt victorious. He'd made it past the hardest part, but the feeling didn't last long. In just a moment, he realized he had made a huge mistake. That sense of pride quickly turned into panic. The small opening gave him just enough room to realize he was trapped. The sharp bend and the position of his legs made it impossible to back out. He tried twisting around to free himself, but the unyielding rock walls held him tight. Panic took over as he struggled in vain. The worst had happened. He was completely stuck, alone, in an unknown section of the cave. Back outside, the other scouts began to notice his absence. At first, they didn't worry too much, still caught up in their own exploration. But as the hours passed and the group gathered to leave, they realized someone was missing. Concern grew quickly, and they began shouting his name and retracing their steps. But no one had seen where Brian went. None of them had noticed the narrow passage he had found. They kept searching the familiar areas, completely unaware that he was trapped in a space almost impossible to detect. Brian could hear his friends calling out for him, and he gathered what little strength he had left to try to respond. But his twisted position made it hard to speak clearly, and his voice came out muffled and weak. Eventually, they heard his faint, frightened reply. They rushed toward the sound and found Brian stuck inside the passage. All they could see were his unmoving legs. No one could tell exactly how he was trapped, especially since they hadn't even realized that tunnel existed. The scouts tried to help, tugging gently on his legs and shouting ideas at him, but nothing worked. Things were getting worse. His chest was bent in an awkward way, and his breathing had become shallow and shaky. The sharp curve of the passage forced his knees backward painfully, sending waves of agony through his body with every tiny movement. The boys ran to get the troop leader, who, in a twist of fate, happened to be Brian's mother. As soon as she heard what had happened, she rushed to the cave, her heart pounding with fear. When she arrived and saw only her son's feet sticking out of the tunnel, she was overcome with a mix of relief and dread. At least he was alive. But the position he was in was dangerous. She crawled as close as she could and called out his name. He answered, scared but conscious. She looked at the situation carefully and realized the only way to get him out was for him to undo the same series of painful twists he'd used to get in. Reversing the motion would be incredibly painful, but it was the only chance. Brian's mom did her best to calm him down and explained what they had to do. The thought of going through that pain again was terrifying. But she didn't give him a choice. She grabbed his legs firmly and told him it was time to move. Brian's scream echoed through the cave, raw with pain and fear. Every inch of movement scraped his skin against the rock, and the twisted position of his knees sent sharp pain through his body. The other scouts stood frozen outside the tunnel, unable to do anything but listen to the horrifying cries of their friend. Some turned away, while others stood still, helpless and overwhelmed. Slowly, Brian's mom managed to pull him back. His body inched through the narrow tunnel as he whimpered and groaned. The rock seemed to fight him every step of the way. Time dragged on, but at last, his chest cleared the tight bend. With one final pull, he was out. He collapsed onto the ground, shaking and sobbing. But before his mother could even hold him, he was gripped by a full-blown panic attack. The space that had once seemed like an adventure now felt like a nightmare. He needed to get out, fast. With his mother's help, he crawled out of the passage. As soon as he saw the floor of the main cave, he dropped to his knees, completely drained. But the panic didn't let up. The darkness and confinement of the cave made it hard for him to breathe. His friends gathered around, holding him and guiding him toward the exit. The moment he stepped out of the cave and felt the fresh air, he collapsed into the grass, gasping for breath like he was coming back to life. The sunlight was almost blinding after so much time in the dark. His mom came out moments later, exhausted and with her hands scratched and bleeding. The group gathered around Brian, but no one could find the words to say anything. What they had just experienced would stay with them forever. In the days that followed, Brian's physical wounds began to heal, but the emotional scars would take much longer to fade. As you can see, most of these incidents involving kids or teenagers usually happen because there's no proper supervision during these cave explorations. Honestly, if I had a kid with me on a trip like this, I wouldn't let them out of my sight for even a second. It was May 25th, 2003, a bright and sunny Sunday. Perfect for the outdoor adventure Chris Molyneux had planned with his family. At 36 years old, Chris considered himself a seasoned caver. He had explored numerous lava tube caves across Washington state. A previous trip with his kids to the well-known Ape Cave had sparked a shared fascination with the subterranean world. That day, he wanted to nurture their curiosity even further by taking them to a lesser-known location, Ice Rink Cave. The night before, Chris had programmed his GPS using coordinates he found on a forum for cave explorers. He studied the map carefully, paying close attention to the multiple entrances and the icy formations that gave the cave its name. The plan seemed perfect for a family outing: a short hike from the parking area, a quick tour underground, and a return home before dinner. But even with all his careful planning, Chris couldn't have predicted that this trip would become his worst nightmare, and soon you'll understand exactly why. The family rode in their old minivan as it climbed slowly up a gravel road maintained by the U.S. Forest Service, winding through the mountain terrain. Chris stopped the car roughly 600 feet from where the GPS marked the cave entrance. He grabbed the essential gear and led the way along a faint trail through the palm pine trees. Before long, they spotted a dip in the ground with a dark crack in the center, what looked like a sinkhole. Chris assumed this was the entrance to Ice Rink Cave. He checked the opening against his map, but hesitated. The diagram showed several possible entrances, and he couldn't say for certain which one this was. Still, the weather was perfect. The kids were excited, and he trusted his experience. He adjusted his helmet, switched on his headlamp, and double-checked his gear pouch, which held 2 backup flashlights, spare batteries, and the folded cave map. As a habit, he slipped the car key into his pocket. It might seem like a small detail that he didn't leave the car key behind, but as you'll soon see, that one decision would prove crucial for his family's safety. Chris chose to enter the cave alone first, to make sure the path led to the main chamber with the ice formations. The entrance narrowed quickly, and with every step, the air grew colder. After descending about 100 feet, he hit what looked like a dead end, except for a side passage barely 18 inches high. He unfolded the map under his flashlight beam and confirmed his position. This was likely the west entrance. If he was right, he just needed to squeeze through that passage, follow a short tunnel, and it would lead him to the larger entry point where the ice was. It seemed like the perfect route for his kids to explore safely. Crawling on his hands and knees, Chris pushed his pouch ahead of him and squeezed into the narrow space. On the other side, he emerged into a wider tunnel that stretched both left and right. According to the map, the main entrance should be to the left. Confident, he continued in that direction, lighting his way as he moved deeper into the darkness. The tunnel seemed endless. Eventually, he reached a section filled with collapsed rocks from the ceiling, a cave, and that wasn't shown on the map. That unsettled him, but he figured the map might be outdated or overly simplified. Carefully, he made his way through the debris, convinced the exit was just ahead. Honestly, the moment you find something in a cave that isn't marked on the map, that should be a clear sign to turn back. But that small oversight pushed Chris even closer to the nightmare waiting for him. Finally, he reached a blockage made of dirt and rubble. There was no natural light at all. This spot looked nothing like what was marked on the map. Glancing at his watch, he realized he'd been underground much longer than he'd told Michelle he would be. He turned around in a rush, increasingly anxious about his family waiting above. After walking for what felt like an eternity, he came upon another blocked entrance that looked eerily similar to the last. Confused, he wondered if it was the same one or a different collapse altogether. Kneeling, he marked an X in the dirt with his finger. He turned around and walked in the opposite direction, counting his steps. Around step 400, his flashlight revealed the same X. Reality hit him hard. He was trapped in a closed loop. Trying to stay calm, he took a deep breath. The only logical explanation was that the entrance he'd come through had to be hidden somewhere nearby. He began inspecting the outer wall of the circular tunnel carefully, inch by inch. Time felt like it was speeding up. He'd already been inside for over an hour. Michelle must have been panicking, and the car key in his pocket now felt like a lead weight. His family was stuck outside with no way to drive and no way to call for help. Still nothing. No tunnel, no crevice. He retraced his steps again, this time feeling along the inner wall. Again, nothing. His flashlight seemed dimmer now. Even though the batteries were fresh, the darkness felt like it was closing in. To avoid losing his sense of direction, he began tearing pieces from the cave map and leaving them at distinct locations. Piles of rocks, strange formations, and the blocked entrance. After 3 full loops and no sign of the exit, his worry turned to panic. His breathing quickened and sweat ran down his face despite the cold. He had now been trapped for over 5 hours, walking in circles. That narrow passageway he had come through felt like a fading memory. Every rock now looked the same. Exhausted, Chris slumped onto a stone, trying to recall whether he had turned left or right after exiting the tight corridor. He couldn't be sure of anything anymore. Another hour passed. Time had lost meaning. The silence was nearly absolute, broken only by the crunch of his footsteps and the sound of his labored breathing. It had been 6 hours, and Chris was still trapped in the loop. That's when he had an idea, something he hadn't tried yet. He returned to the site of the collapse, this time crawling close to the floor, inspecting every inch of the lower wall. About 50 feet from the blockage, he noticed a subtle change in shadow. He crouched lower. There it was, an opening, just under 20 inches high, partly hidden by a bulge in the rock. Relief washed over him, quickly followed by disbelief. The exit had been there the entire time. He had made a wrong turn right from the start. He had gone left, just like he remembered, but by nearly completing a full loop around the cave before encountering the blockage, he mistakenly assumed the exit must be on the opposite side. Chris had finally made it out, but there was one more problem. The parking lot was empty. Michelle and the kids were gone. Chris stood in the stillness of the mountains, overwhelmed by the weight of what had almost happened. He later learned that, terrified by how long he had been gone, Michelle had made a tough call. She took the kids and hiked back to the road. There, she flagged down a passing vehicle and got a ride to the ranger station to get help. She returned with the rescue team just as Chris was emerging from the cave. His 6-hour ordeal was finally over. And something interesting happened afterward. The formation earned a new nickname, Minotaur Cave, a dark reference to the maze that had nearly become Chris's tomb. I can't help but wonder, what if he hadn't gone into the cave alone? Do you think things would have turned out better or worse if he'd gone in with his family? Let me know in the comments. Hidden deep in the forests of western Massachusetts lies a marble cave known as Convention Cave. Its entrance is small and unassuming, nestled on the side of a hill, giving no indication of the dangers beneath the surface. The cave was first discovered in 1979 during the National Speleological Society's annual convention, which took place in Pittsfield. Despite being only about 200 feet long, this cave presents a serious challenge, even for experienced cavers. Two friends, whose names weren't found in the reports I researched, were driven by curiosity and the thrill of exploring the remote Berkshire terrain. They soon found themselves in a situation as unexpected as it was dangerous. One of them decided to take a quick look inside, not realizing just how quickly things would spiral out of control. They approached the cave's entrance, a narrow hole that led down into the underground. At first glance, nothing seemed threatening. It was just another quiet opening in the landscape, waiting to be explored. The man leading the way leaned in for a closer look. Maybe it was the excitement, or maybe he let his guard down for a second, but as he shifted his weight forward, things went wrong fast. The ground beneath him was slick with a thin layer of moisture. His footing gave way. In an instant, he slipped and tumbled into the cave. What had been a moment of curiosity instantly turned into horror. He got wedged tightly between two massive boulders, head down, his body twisted and contorted, completely unable to move. The rocks compressed his chest, and the cramped space gave him no way to reposition himself, let alone escape. It all happened so fast. One moment he was simply exploring, the next he was trapped in the cold, dark belly of the cave, completely helpless. His friend, horrified by what he just witnessed, rushed over to help. He screamed for help, but there was only the forest. Quiet, empty, unresponsive. The trapped man struggled to break free, but the pressure from the rocks only made the pain worse. Bruises started forming all over his body, and his breathing became labored as panic set in. His friend ran back to the entrance, hands trembling as he pulled out his phone. But there was almost no signal. The thick forest canopy and solid rock around them blocked any chance of connecting. Then, somehow, a single bar appeared. Without hesitation, he called 911, and from that moment, the clock was ticking. The man inside could feel the cave's chill sinking into his skin. His body was already covered in scrapes and bruises. Breathing became more and more difficult, and the fear of being trapped in total darkness kept growing. And let's be honest, the position he was in didn't offer much hope of a successful rescue if help didn't arrive quickly. Being stuck upside down, even for a short period, is extremely dangerous. In that position, blood begins to pool in the head, increasing pressure on the eyes, brain, and blood vessels. This can cause swelling, internal bleeding, and in more severe cases, unconsciousness. As time goes on, the heart has to work harder to pump blood against gravity. If circulation is impaired for too long, the risk of organ failure increases. Some studies suggest that being upside down for more than 20 to 30 minutes in extreme conditions can cause permanent damage or even death. In this man's case, the combination of being upside down, the cold, the pressure on his chest, and complete immobility created a life-threatening situation. Every second counted. On the other end of the line, firefighters quickly understood how serious the situation was. The team leader, a man with 37 years of experience, had seen it all. Fires, car crashes, high-risk rescues, but never a cave extraction. This was uncharted territory for the entire crew. Inside the cave, the man continued to struggle. His back was showing signs of serious injury, and he had hit his head hard on the rocks during the fall, causing a deep, bleeding gash. Blood soaked through his clothes and pooled on the cave floor. Time seemed to freeze. The wet, cold rock walls around him gave no comfort, only a growing sense of despair. His friend did his best to stay calm, talking to him constantly, trying to keep his hope alive. But the minutes dragged on, and the helplessness only deepened. Finally, after what felt like forever, the sound of footsteps echoed through the forest. The rescue team had arrived, but the hard part was far from over. Once on site, the rescue technicians quickly realized how complex this mission would be. The friend, who had stayed close the entire time, explained exactly what had happened and showed them where his partner was trapped. The first step was to assess the situation carefully. Rescuers noted the entrance was slippery and tight, making movement difficult. They managed to communicate with the trapped man, who was still conscious but clearly in pain. The team set up a support base near the entrance and began assembling their gear. A rescue tripod was positioned over the cave's opening, serving as an anchor point for the ropes. This system allowed for vertical lifting and precise movement in the cramped space. Special inflatable bags were slowly inserted into the crevice to widen it without causing a collapse. Meanwhile, rescuers cushioned the man's body and provided oxygen, as his breathing was already severely restricted. Throughout the entire operation, they kept talking to him, both to calm him and to monitor his condition. A safety harness was carefully fitted to his body, and when everything was ready, the extraction began. Using a pulley system attached to the tripod, the team made slow, deliberate movements. With each pull, the inflatable devices were adjusted to stabilize the surrounding rocks. After nearly 2 hours of painstaking work, they finally freed him. He was exhausted, suffering from serious injuries to his back and head, but he was alive. It was only thanks to the rescue team's skill and determination. His friend, overwhelmed with relief, cried as he watched him come out of the cave. But the trauma, both physical and emotional, would leave a permanent mark. The rescue was a success, but the time spent trapped and the terrifying uncertainty about whether he'd make it out alive would stay with him forever. If you thought this story was intense, wait until you see the one popping up on your screen right now. It starts just like this one, but ends in an even more tragic way. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. It really means a lot. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. On April 9th, 2005, a 20-year-old named Richard Harness led a group of 12 excited kids deep into one of the most infamous and treacherous caves in the region, Devil's Den Cave. Richard believed he had enough experience to guide the school activity through the twisting underground tunnels beneath the Ozark Mountains. He had been there before, and that familiarity gave him confidence. Maybe too much. As Richard gave a safety briefing to the group, Melissa Jones, a fellow instructor, waited outside the cave. She was scheduled to lead a second group of students later that day. The weather outside was pleasant, around 68 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside, between the limestone passages, the air held steady at 55 degrees, just cold enough to slowly leach warmth from the body. The kids, ranging in age from 8 to 12, were buzzing with excitement as they strapped on helmets and flicked on their headlamps. None of them had ever explored a real natural cave before. Their only experiences underground had been at tourist caves with paved walkways and bright overhead lighting. Richard carried a small backpack stocked with bottled water, granola bars, a basic first aid kit, and spare batteries. It was everything he thought he'd need for a short 3-hour trip. But what he didn't consider was the fact that since his last visit 6 months earlier, he had gained about 15 pounds. It didn't seem like a big deal when he volunteered for the trip, but it would soon prove critical. By 11:30 a.m., the group had already navigated a series of increasingly tight horizontal tunnels. The kids, being small and light, had no trouble squeezing through narrow spaces. Richard, on the other hand, often had to exhale fully and twist his body just to keep moving. Every challenge they overcame gave him a false sense of confidence. Then they reached a tougher obstacle, a vertical crack, roughly 10 inches wide and 6 feet tall, that connected two horizontal tunnels. Shining his flashlight through, Richard could see that the tunnel on the other side opened up slightly, wide enough for someone his size to crawl on their knees. He liked to call that space a chamber, even though it was really just a slightly wider stretch of tunnel. Richard remembered passing through this spot before and decided it was safe enough. He let the children go first while he stayed behind to supervise. One by one, the kids turned sideways and squeezed through the narrow fissure. Their slim bodies scraped against the cold rock, and a few of them groaned at the feel of the rough limestone against their ribs and spines. But they all made it through and crawled ahead, lighting up the tight tunnel with their headlamps. Then it was Richard's turn. He rotated his body and began sliding into the gap. Almost immediately, he noticed the walls felt tighter than he remembered, his chest pressed against one side and his back against the other. Still, he kept going, sucking in his stomach and forcing himself forward. But midway through, he got stuck. The passage narrowed in such a subtle way that his hips, a few inches wider than his chest, couldn't pass. When he tried to back out, he found that the angle trapped him. He was stuck. Unable to move forward or backward, his chest compressed and his breathing labored, Richard was hit with a wave of panic. His heart pounded. He could barely breathe. Even worse, 12 children were now stranded on the other side, out of reach from any help, all because of his mistake. His body had become the very wall blocking their escape. On the other side, the kids' excitement turned to fear. They watched in disbelief as their adult guide became wedged in the stone. Some of them froze, unsure of what to do. Others started to cry quietly. The older ones crawled back toward the crack, trying to see how Richard was doing. What they saw was terrifying. He was completely motionless, locked in the narrow vertical gap, unable to move an inch. The sense of safety they felt just from being with an adult vanished in an instant. If he couldn't save himself, who would save them? Meanwhile, outside the cave, Melissa Jones checked her watch. There were still over 3 hours to go before the group was expected back at 3 p.m. Oblivious to the crisis unfolding underground, she enjoyed the spring sun, occasionally glancing toward the cave entrance, waiting for the kids to return on time. Inside, the first 30 minutes were filled with frantic attempts by Richard to free himself, but every push only seemed to wedge him deeper. His hips had become an anchor. The children, growing more distressed, watched helplessly. Richard's movements slowed, his breathing became shallower, and as the minutes passed, the cold air began to take its toll. With no room to move, their bodies began losing heat. Despite his own worsening condition, Richard still gave instructions. He told the kids to huddle together to try to preserve body warmth. But Richard's physical state was declining fast. His legs, hanging freely below the point of entrapment, began to go numb. Circulation was failing. It was the beginning of a dangerous condition known as crush syndrome, which can be fatal when blood flow is cut off for extended periods. After 2 hours, the air inside the cave was changing. The first symptoms began to appear: headaches, dizziness, nausea. Their bodies were warning them that the air was growing stale. Outside, Melissa still had no idea what was happening. The group wouldn't be considered missing until after their scheduled return time, and that time was fast approaching. By hour 3, some of the children stopped moving. Their water supply was nearly gone, and dehydration was speeding up the effects of hypothermia. 2 of the youngest kids even drifted off to sleep, despite efforts from the others to keep them awake, a deeply worrying sign that their body temperatures were falling dangerously low. At exactly 3 p.m., Melissa realized something was wrong. She immediately alerted park rangers, who began organizing a search, but precious hours had already been lost, time during which the situation underground had become much more severe. When rescuers finally located the group, they were horrified. Richard was jammed tight in the vertical fissure, completely drained. The kids were all stuck behind him, unable to exit or even be reached. The first attempts to free him were disastrous. Park rangers and local firefighters, untrained in cave rescue, used sledgehammers and chisels to try to break the rock. Every blow echoed violently through the cave, threatening to destabilize the structure. One rescuer even broke his hand with a poorly aimed strike. It was clear this job needed more than brute force. 2 hours later, a specialized rescue team from Washington County arrived. They quickly recognized that breaking the rock was too risky. Instead, they focused on Richard himself. Using nylon rescue webbing, common in climbing and emergency operations, they created harness loops under his arms. In a coordinated effort, they managed to lift Richard just a few inches, enough to reach a slightly wider part of the fissure. After 5 hours stuck between solid stone, Richard was finally freed. As circulation returned to his legs and lower body, he was hit with waves of searing pain, like thousands of needles piercing him all at once. As he was carried out of the cave, rescuers moved quickly to reach the children. They prioritized the weakest, guiding each one back through the same narrow tunnel with extreme care. The rescue team worked slowly and methodically until all 12 children were finally brought to safety. Outside, medical teams were standing by. 2 of the youngest kids were taken immediately to the hospital. While most of the children were visibly shaken, they responded well to emergency care and were taken to a nearby hospital for evaluation. Thankfully, none of them suffered permanent physical harm. Richard, although he managed to walk out on his own, thanks to a surge of adrenaline, was left with lasting physical and emotional trauma. As for the children, who witnessed their only adult guide trapped and helpless, the psychological scars would take a long time to heal. January 8, 1995 dawned cold and clear over the Tennessee mountains. Clinton Farrell, 25 years old, had no idea that what started as an ordinary Sunday would soon turn into a living nightmare. He and a friend had heard local legends about the mysterious Cookston Cave and about possible relics hidden deep within. Despite having zero experience with cave exploration, the 2 young men decided to check it out, hoping they might find something valuable. Their preparation, however, was dangerously careless. They wore everyday clothes and cowboy-style boots, completely unsuitable for the slick, wet surfaces of a cave. They brought no helmets, no proper lighting equipment, and none of the basic safety gear seasoned explorers would consider essential. Their only source of light was a pair of cheap flashlights they'd picked up at a hardware store in town. The entrance to Cookston Cave yawned before them like a dark mouth on the Tennessee hillside. Formed over millennia by underground water seeping through the limestone, the cave was a sprawling maze of tunnels, chambers, and tight passageways. What looked like a simple opening actually hid miles of interconnected corridors that had claimed the lives of unprepared adventurers before them. Clinton and his friend entered, energized by youthful excitement and the naivety that comes with inexperience. The main tunnel sloped gently downward, giving them a false sense of safety at first. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, and the cold, damp air turned their breath into little clouds. As they went deeper, the passage narrowed and began to climb upward again, leading into a section that any experienced caver would recognize as geologically unstable. There were obvious signs of previous collapses, loose chunks of rock scattered across the floor, but the 2 treasure hunters paid no mind to the warnings under their feet. Clinton had to squeeze through a particularly tight section where the narrow tunnel took a sharp turn upward. He was forced to twist his body, pressing his head against one side of the stone, while his torso followed the curve of the wall, and his legs stretched out behind him into the lower part of the passage. The position seemed awkward but harmless at first. The rock that would change his life was moments away from breaking loose. A massive slab of limestone, weighing about 500 pounds, had been shifting ever so slowly over decades, weakened by erosion, moisture, and cycles of freezing and thawing that had worn away its supports. As Clinton adjusted his position inside the narrow gap, perhaps hoping to spot a relic or artifact, his subtle movements were the final trigger. With a bone-chilling crack that echoed through the cave like muffled thunder, the massive boulder broke free. With terrifying speed, the rock crashed down, pinning Clinton's head against the stone wall with crushing force. The impact was immediate, devastating, and completely immobilizing. Any movement risked triggering more collapses or increasing the pressure on his already fractured skull. His friend, just a few feet behind, heard the rumble of the falling rock, followed by a muffled, desperate scream that quickly faded into the cold silence of the cave. The sight he encountered would haunt him forever. Clinton was trapped, his head pinned by a boulder larger than a household refrigerator. Somehow, he was still conscious but unable to move without putting himself in even greater danger. In a moment of courage and panic, his friend made the agonizing decision to leave him behind and go for help. He had to retrace their steps in the dark through the treacherous network of tunnels until he could find a phone and call emergency services. Outside, the call triggered one of the largest cave rescue operations in Tennessee history. Emergency teams from Sequatchie and Hamilton counties mobilized with specialized equipment designed for underground rescues. These weren't your typical first responders. They were trained experts accustomed to working in the extreme conditions caves present. What they found was the stuff of nightmares. Clinton was trapped about 200 feet from the entrance, pinned in a narrow tunnel with a half-ton boulder pressing against his head, in an area so unstable that even the smallest misstep could cause more rock to fall. Heavy machinery couldn't reach that far inside, so everything had to be done by hand, relying solely on human skill and precision tools. Down in the cave, Clinton was fighting to stay conscious through searing pain and growing disorientation. His twisted position made it hard to breathe and slowed his circulation. The cave's steady chill was draining his body heat, putting him at risk of hypothermia. The rescue team worked with surgical precision to stabilize both Clinton and the rock pinning him down. Using a method called shoring, they built supports around the boulder to prevent any further movement that could prove deadly. The key tool turned out to be a mechanical device called a come-along, a type of hand-powered winch that uses cables and pulleys to move heavy objects with controlled force. The team set it up carefully, applying just the right amount of pressure at the exact angle needed to gradually shift the boulder without causing another collapse. The process was painstakingly slow and incredibly risky. After every adjustment, rescuers would pause to check for even the slightest shift in the surrounding rock. Teams rotated in and out, working non-stop for nearly 5 hours. When they finally managed to free Clinton's head, the ordeal was far from over. His injuries were severe, and any movement risked worsening potential spinal or brain damage. He was secured in a special stretcher designed specifically for cave extractions. Getting him out became another harrowing mission, as rescuers had to navigate tight corridors while carrying the injured man with extreme caution. Once outside the cave, there was still a steep 100-foot climb up to the road where ambulances were waiting. Using ropes and manual pulley systems, the team carefully hauled Clinton up the rocky incline without compromising his stability. At the top, a medical helicopter was already on standby, with paramedics ready to fly him to the nearest trauma center. After nearly 6 hours underground and an intense rescue effort, Clinton was finally in the care of medical professionals. At the hospital, doctors were stunned by the extent of the injuries inflicted by a 500-pound slab of limestone crashing onto his skull. Despite the severity of the trauma, there was hope. Clinton's youth and physical resilience impressed the medical team. The Cookston Cave incident became a turning point in Tennessee's cave safety policies. The site was closed off to the public immediately, and the rescue became a case study in what can go wrong when people enter caves unprepared. Clinton's recovery took months of physical therapy, but he survived. The once hopeful treasure hunter learned the hard way that caves demand respect, preparation, and knowledge. His story is now told as a warning to anyone thinking of venturing underground without knowing what they're getting into. And how about you? Have you taken a moment today to appreciate the fact that cave exploration is 100% optional? If you found this story intense, just wait until you check out the one on your screen right now. It started out just as innocent and ended up even worse. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed it. It really helps the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.